On the Block with Andrew Garbage, a podcast about authentic people doing beautiful things. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the program, everybody. This is your host, Andy Garbage. Stoked about this week's guest. We are snuggling into our fall lineup. You know, I love this time of year. I was born in the fall. The school term starts. Everyone's back, at least in my world, to the beginning of a cycle. It's funny how the fall signifies the end of things in nature, and in so many people's lives, and in so many people's, I guess, work and life trajectory, and especially if you're outdoor people and stuff. But for me, the fall signifies the beginning of everything. It's a massive reset. Everything's changing. The show is about the study of transformations, and I love the fall and the spring because they're such seasons of transformation. When you go outside, the air, the quality of the light, the temperature, the leaves, everything is in this process of flux and of transformation, and I think it's just a great time to experience the world, to contemplate our connection to it, and how we too are beings of change and transformation. I'm stoked on our guest this week, Willy Vlautin. Another guest that we had at Mount Hood Community College as part of our Mouths of Others writing series that folks like Lydia Yuknovich and others there on the committee that I work with have worked so hard to bring these amazing world-class artists to campus for this series of talks and readings and interaction with our students. And as I've said before, I got to interview these people. I get to every time they come to the school. We have a state-of-the-art production facility there for KMHD Studios at Mount Hood Community College. #1 jazz station in the United States, by the way. And producer of this show, Michael DiNapoli, was a former student at Mount Hood and a writing student of mine, and he and I were the ones who concocted this scheme originally to start interviewing these world-class artists as they came to campus. I mentioned, I think last week with Pam Houston, a week before, that Mike brought this idea to me originally, and Mike also did Midnight Sunrise Radio out there with some of the luminaries from the hippie community, Charles Shaw, Random Rab, and Android Jones. And then we started working on the Block Radio together. So all of it cycles back to some of the really wonderful, creative, and beautiful things being done by the students and the faculty at Mount Hood Community College. And we had Willy come out, I believe it was last year, for a conversation, and we're going to play that today. Willy Vlautin is many things, but he is a singer and songwriter. He started playing guitar when he was a teenager, became immersed in music. He founded the band Richmond Fontaine, which has, I believe, 9 studio albums to date. Some of the innovators in that alt country scene, really cool band. And then he started writing stories too. And I've heard Willy, say something funny. He goes, when I'm writing terrible songs, I consider myself an author. And when I'm writing terrible stories, I consider myself a songwriter. And it's a clever statement, and it's a real insight into the kind of dude Willy is. When you read his writing, when you hear his music, when you meet him in person, he's got this really sort of homespun, almost Southern wisdom to him, and it's almost a caricature until you realize that the guy's not playing around, and underneath this sort of genteel persona is a person with a very clean and a very keen eye to look into some of the complicated and dirty aspects of the human condition. Ursula K, who should just be a hero to all of us, calls him an unsentimental Steinbeck. And she says Willy Vlautin tells us who really lives now in our America, our city in ruins. And that's just a perfect sort of, he's a Raymond Carver kind of guy, a perfect analysis of the kind of dude Willy is. I saw him at the Oregon Book Awards, winning for, believe it was for the MOTEL Life, but I could be wrong on that. recently and winning an award. And he got up and he told this little story about, and I'm not even going to try to approximate his accent, but he was like, you write these stories and you release them out into the world like children or like a message in a bottle, and then they go out there and you hope that they do well, and you hope that they meet people and form relationships on their own, and you don't really know, and he's talking about this, his art, these pieces almost as if they're children, and he has such a simple and in one sense, from one frame, one might say, what's the word I'm looking for? It's such a pure, simple, and kind of almost naive view of the world. But then when you scratch the surface on that, you find a profound eye and an unflinching eye. And as Ursula said, a completely robust and unsentimental Steinbeckian eye into what it is to be alive in modern America. Willy pulls no punches as he tells us the stories of ourselves back to us. In a way that's not preachy, but still remains incredibly profound and accessible. I just so excited to talk to him, and you got to check out his work. Get over to his website. The MOTEL Life is a great book. Lean on Pete, or the free, fantastic. The Lean on Pete film is forthcoming and looks to be really, really, really cool as well. So Willy Vlautin here for you on the Block Radio. Be in contact with us, folks. If if there's anything on the show, listeners have been writing in and suggesting guests, and we've been doing our best to hunt these people down, vet them, and see if they are appropriate for the show. And in almost all the cases so far, they have been. So we welcome your suggestions for the show, for future guests. Have some amazing people coming up in the next few months. Chuck Barber, the percussionist, will be up soon. We have the Black Lives Matter activist Caleb Stevens, the author of The Long Trip, the British archaeologist and studier of archaeoacoustics, Paul Devereaux will be on the show, the psychonaut David J. Brown. Wonderful, wonderful folks coming up for the rest of our fall season. We know you're going to enjoy. Hey, as always, as we go into the end of the year, if you're considering your fall giving, if you're considering making a donation to an organization, think about On the Block Radio. There's a donate button on our website for PayPal. The show is entirely financed by us, by the folks who make it. We basically split the costs to run this thing between myself and producer Mike DiNapoli. So if you're in the giving mood and feel like the show is serving a need in your life, we don't charge to make it. We will never charge for people to listen to the program. But if you have the desire and ability, please do send a few bucks our way so we can continue bringing you these fantastic conversations of transformation. All right, enjoy Willy Vlautin, folks. We know you're going to love him. And if you have a couple bucks, get over and buy his books and stuff as well. We'd always rather you support our guests. If you have the choice first and foremost, and then us second after that. All right, we love you much. We hope you enjoy the program, and we will see you on the other side.
said he'd gone to California. He was a merchant marine. He rented us a house with a yard, a house with a porch. At night we'd sit out on it, and he'd tell me of Thailand and of Singapore and of Hong Kong, Vietnam. Money he made and the women he had, miles and miles and miles, seeing sand, miles m'appelle Willy Vlautin, pour Cheyenne in Autumn. I come from Reno, Nevada, and now I live in Scappoose, Oregon, where I wrote this book. I guess for people that have never read me before, I write, or I hope to write, stories about the working class. I've always been a fan of stories about working people and normal people and the day-to-day struggles they go through. The hardest scene for me to write on, for Lean on Pete, was probably, well, a couple of them. One being, of course, Lean on Pete's death. It came out of the blue one day when I was working on it, and that was a really hard scene to write, almost more for the woman that hits him. I felt really bad for her. Another one that was hard for me to write was the relationship between Charlie and this girl he meets named Ruby. She's just a small character in the book, but I felt that she was in such trouble and going to go down such a hard path that having those two meet and then having her disappear with a kind of a questionable future, to say the least, was hard. And then I think the last scene that was really hard for me to write was the scene where, well, it was actually fun but also horrific, was a scene with Silver. Ends up letting Charlie stay in his camper, and it kind of unravels into a pretty dark situation for Charlie, and I hated putting the kid in that situation. I always liked the name Charlie. That's pretty simple. The name stuck with me. Thompson is for two reasons. I was a house painter for years, and my partner was named Sarah Thompson. And I always liked her name because it reminds me of the great writer Jim Thompson. And Jim Thompson's one of my favorite writers. And so, in tribute to Jim Thompson, I combined the names. Raymond Carver is an influence, for sure. There is a great Australian songwriter named Paul Kelly. And Paul Kelly was a fan of Raymond Carver and wrote a song called Everything's Turning to White, based on a Raymond Carver song, a short story. And I was 20 years old when I heard the song, and I looked on the record cover and it said inspired by Raymond Carver, and so I went and bought a Raymond Carver book. And really it was Carver telling stories about things I knew about. It was like an uncle of mine whispering stories of our family in my ear.
Let's meet on the logging road. No one has to know. We've been fighting this for a year, but now it's clear we're meant to be.
Writing songs and novels are both the same and very different. In both you want emotion. You know, for me, I love a novel that feels like it's written in blood, and those are always the best songs. The difference between the two is a novel just takes years, so you go through so many different phases, and writing a song is just like a moment in time. It's like a snapshot. I always say the same thing. When I'm writing good songs, I'm a musician. And when I'm writing good stories, I'm a writer. And when I'm writing bad songs, I'm a writer. And when I'm writing bad stories, I'm a musician. So they help each other. I think all my stories, they all live in the same apartment building. And the songs and the stories kind of intermingle. They're the same heart. They're just told from different angles.
But if you want to spend your life treading on breaking ice, and I'll leave you alone. But I know that you hate it here.
I've loved
songs so much. I believed in rock and roll more than anybody, and the power of folk songs. I always liked story songs. And I loved movies and novels, like The Count of Monte Cristo. As a kid, I wanted to live inside books like that. And as I got older, I couldn't figure out how I could live inside them without going crazy, except for writing them. And so I think in a person's life, I wanted to live my life around people that liked books and liked records and liked movies and thought it was okay to live your life loving those things. And so I guess really I always wanted my books, you know, to be in a library next to all the other books, just to be a part of it, and that is enough for me in life. So that's why I started writing. My dad and me left Spokane and we moved to Portland. I didn't know anybody. We rented out a house down the street from a horse track. I was 15, and my dad, he never came home after work, and he never had any money. I tried for a lot of jobs, but the only one I could get was working at the track, cleaning out stalls and grooming horses for an old man named Del Montgomery. Del wasn't much, though. He wasn't a good guy at all. There are nearly 1,000 horses at Portland Meadows, row after row, and stall after stall of them. The only one I remember, the only one that seems to matter now, is Lean on Pete. And I can't stop thinking about him. Even when I'm sleeping, I do. See, both of our lives fell apart there at the same time. And it ain't much of a place to fall apart. This is a story of how I tried to get us out of there. How we tried to escape. I think I was so troubled by my love for horse racing that I wrote Lean on Pete. It's the story of a 15-year-old kid in Portland, Oregon, who ends up working at horse track. He befriends this kind of beaten down, failing racehorse named Lean on Pete. And it's the story of those two trying to get by. I started following racehorse when I grew up in Reno, Nevada, and there was some really great off-track betting parlors. And then when I moved to Portland, there's no places like Reno. There's no gambling, the casinos, none of that culture, except they had like a really low level, like single A baseball style horse track, really down and out, end of the line sort of track. But I fell in love with it just because I was homesick, and then I fell in love with it because watching westerns, you know, grew up with horses, watching them. Never rode a horse, but I fell in love with, like when you fall in love with something, you just start following it and try to get closer to it. And so I started hanging out all the time at the track, 4 days a week. And then I started writing out there because no one's ever out there, and huge tables that you could sit at, like a library. And then I started following the horses, and then I met a jockey, and who was a really cute woman jockey, and I started getting a crush on her, so I met her, and then I fell in love with the horses. Like, I got to buy a racehorse. Well, years later, I ended up buying a racehorse that kind of looks like Lean on Pete. In Portland, you can buy a racehorse for like $200 or, you know, whatever you got for a failed, you know, bad one. So I ended up buying a racehorse just because I wanted to get closer to figuring it out. And I made friends with guys that worked on the backside, and I started hanging out back there a little bit. And but like when you do fall in love with something, you see the dark side of it too. And horse racing, I'm tormented by it because it's it's a dark sport and a rough sport on horses and jockeys, especially at a low level. But the gambling and the culture is really fun too. I own one horse really, and his name was his racing name is Immeritable Dash, and he's a grandson of Dash for Cash, the famous quarter horse. And I found him on the internet and like dreamhorse.com, they call it in Portland, you know. And I fell in love with him, and he was a horrible racehorse. And when I found him, he was a pack horse in the Cascade Mountains for just kind of hillbilly guy, and he was really underweight and really sweet, you know. And so then we brought him home and healed him up, and then he became a surly, mean sort of racehorse. And it's taken years to calm him down. Racehorses are bred and made for racing only, and so they definitely have a different edge to them that most other horses don't. And it's taken a while to get a hold of that.
Well, a jockey's drunk, pukes his guts out in an alley. A man loses 100 in a race on TV. Jockey falls off in the 5th. The man loses his rent on that horse in the 5th. Now the horse, he's found both. He's lost 6 in a row, and the killers take him down the road in a trailer that's rusted out and shaking. The jockey's sweating it out in a hospital bed. And oh man, how he's got the shakes. The man's a wreck, just sits all night in the parking lot.
Hey everybody, this is Mitchell Jackson. You're listening to On the Block Radio.
Welcome everyone, this is Professor Andy Gurbich. We are delighted today to have with us talented novelist and songwriter Willy Vlautin. As an author, Willy has written 4 novels, The Motel Life, Northline, Lean on Pete, and most recently The Free, released in February 2014. And also as the lead singer and songwriter of the Portland, Oregon-based Richmond Fontaine. Willy's released 9 studio albums to date, with the 10th one on the way. Vlautin's first book, The Motel Life, was an editor's choice in the New York Times Book Review and named one of the top 25 books of the year by the Washington Post. In November 2013, Polsky Films released the film version of The Motel Life, starring Emil Hirsch, Stephen Dorff, Dakota Fanning, and my personal favorite, Chris Christopherson. Vlautin's third novel, Lean on Pete, is the story of a 15-year-old boy who works and lives on a rundown racetrack in Portland, Oregon, and befriends a failed racehorse named Lean on Pete. The Sunday Herald stated, Lean on Pete confirms his status as one of the most emotionally charged writers in America. Lean on Pete won 2 Oregon Book Awards, the Ken Kesey Award for Fiction and the People's Choice Award. In Vlautin's latest release, The Free, the poverty and trauma of war dominate a compelling vision of modern America, but love and redemption can also be found. Vlautin's book explores the circumstances and relationships of people near the bottom of America's social and economic spectrum and reveal the capacity of the human spirit to survive and beat the odds. Willy Vlautin, welcome to Mountain Community College.
Hey, well, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here, man. So let's back up a little bit. I'm really interested in you. You're a tough nut for me to crack, right? You grew up in Reno, Nevada.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and tell me about your time there. So it was you and your brother and your mom.
Yeah, and then later on, my mom's boyfriend moved in, and he was a good guy. But for my childhood, I guess I was 12 or so. It was mostly my mom and my brother and I. And, my mom worked the same job for, I think, 30 years, and she tried the best she could. She was a really nice, hardworking woman. And so, I was never a rebellious kid or anything like that. It's really hard to rebel when your mom, works so hard and sacrifices so much. So,
is your mom still alive?
No.
Okay, what about your dad? Do you have contact with him?
He passed away in, early 2000. I never lived with him. I lived a mile and a half away with him. He was a good, smart guy, really cool guy. Wasn't a hands-on sort of dad. He kind of upgraded families. But he's a smart guy, a good guy to get a drink with, that's for sure.
I've heard you mention in interviews and even today at our reading event here at the school that your relationship with your brother, you said that you were one of the saddest people he ever met when you were 13 years old. And I'm just wondering, you've talked a lot about kind of having a regular childhood, and I think you mentioned somewhere that your aspirations at the time were maybe working in your uncle's junkyard or something. And I'm just wondering how it started. How'd you start playing music? How'd you go from being a kind of shy, reserved kid to writing books and playing music and playing in front of people? I'm always fascinated in this transition because there's these people that say I come from this childhood where I never could have imagined standing in front of people and talking to them and playing in front of them and sharing my stories with them, but here you are doing all those things for a living. So how'd that start?
I guess first off, I think when you're talking about you must have read that somewhere, though, my uncle Junkyard, that was the first novel I ever wrote. It was a daydream. Okay. I was like, if I could live anywhere, if I could be anybody. Well, first off, I'd probably be Mac from in Cannery Row, John Steinbeck's book. I would have been one of Mac and the boys. But when I wrote my first book, just for fun, I was taking a class, and I was so bored in the class, I just started writing a fantasy novel. And my version of a fantasy was my uncle owned a wrecking yard, and we would steal cars and barbecue, and my uncle would give me advice. So that's how my first story started. Really, I was just a serious fan of records and novels and movies as a kid. I was really shy. I didn't like being a kid at all, and the only comfort I really got, I felt that comforted me were records and movies and books. As far as records, I would just listen to them over and over, and I became obsessed with them.
What'd you listen to at that age?
Bruce Springsteen, the Pogues, bands like X. I listened to anything. Yeah. I was obsessed with Yes.
Wow.
So it jumped around. But I bought into it more than anybody I knew. I really believed him. Willie Nelson is my personal patron saint to me. Willie Nelson got me through most of my childhood. I love him, and he's always my best friend because he's always the same. I have his records, and they always bring me comfort. So I bought into it more, I think, and same with movies. If I was lonely and I wanted a girlfriend when I was a kid, or a new mom or a new dad, I just found a movie that fit that, and then I would see that movie as many times as I could and disappear into the movie until it wore out, and then I would find another movie that I could disappear into, and same with novels. So I guess escapism is kind of the key to those things. As a kid, I didn't like being where I was, and so I didn't know what to do about it. So I just made stuff up or disappeared into other people's worlds.
And when did you start making your own world in this way?
Well, yeah, like I said, I might have exaggerated a little in between those two, I guess. My brother did buy me a guitar because I was very shy. I had a really hard time in school, and my brother said maybe it would take the edge off me. I always had a big edge on me, and he said maybe it would help. So, 13, 14, and it did. It really helped me. I wrote songs obsessively, from age 13. I didn't stop.
So immediately on the instrument, you started writing songs. It wasn't just like you were pecking away at chords.
I should have taken some guitar lessons, but I didn't have any interest in that. I just wanted to write them, and it's not the smartest way to do it, but I loved writing songs, and like I said, I didn't sleep away from my guitar till I was like 26.
And then you started playing in bands. How soon after that?
Well,
15,
it's like I was a fool, so you always want to, you want to take the next step. My big dream for years was to be in a flyer, to be in a band that was on a real flyer. On a telephone pole or in a store, record store, to see your band's name up there. And then after that, my big dream was to get a van, You know, if we had a real band, then we'd be a real band. So I was pragmatic in my dreams, I guess, but I really just wanted to be a part of it, music. And then and novels I always wrote them for myself. And novels always been my favorite thing to do. But I never had the courage to show them to anybody. So I wrote novels from, say, 20 to 35 without showing them to anybody.
Wow.
You know?
And when's the first time you did?
I mean, I'd show it to friends. I really showed it to somebody. I was 35. I showed this woman the Motel Life. She was an agent, and my band at the Richmond Fontaine was doing better at the time, and so this agent had heard that I'd written novels, and so she came up to me one night, and she's a really smart, really cool lady, and she was nice enough to ask to see the free, and so she read it and took me on and sold the book and all that, and then I started publishing them. So
now I'm fascinated how this happens. I got a ton of questions about this. I want to come back to how the band got started and talk a bit about that. But since you brought this up, I mean, were you worried about showing it to her? I mean, what pushed you over the edge to this whole time you're writing these things and not showing them to anybody? And then what made you go, yeah, you know what?
I guess confidence. It's the same thing. I was a fan. I was really a fan of novels. I got to the point where I was like, I hope before I die, one of my novels ends up in a bookstore or in a library next to all the other books, because I wanted to be a part of it. And then I guess I was about 35 at this point. My band was doing better. I had a little more confidence, in myself. I had, I was a house painter. I had my own little house painting business. And so I just felt a little bit better about myself. So I finally said, well, look, if I'm no good as a novelist, I think I could take it. The problem with being no good at something is very seldom are you not good at something and you keep trying to be good at it for years. So not knowing was better for me, because I liked the process of writing a novel, and I loved writing novels. And I was really scared that if people said I was no good at it, that I would quit one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
So I just took a chance, and it worked out.
Worked out. Yeah, I'll say.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you thought, even for a second about this, or, just a bit about your process, if you were worried that, since you had already started, like you said, your band was doing well, you had already had a name in that arena. There are times when an artist that's known in one area tries to go do something else, and it doesn't work out so well. You know what I mean? I'm thinking of like Jared Leto trying to go play music with 30 Seconds to Mars. I'm thinking about, the Bacon Brothers or something.
Right.
And God bless them, man. If someone wants to go out and go tour around and play music, it's great, but they're never able to really get any kind of notoriety in the one area. And it's like Michael Jordan playing baseball or something, right? Or if it goes well, then it ends up like a Nick Cave thing, right? You know what I mean? He writes in The Ass Saw the Angel, and it only adds to his lore. Or Tom Waits or something going into acting. So, were you worried that, man, I want to be more of a Nick Cave, Tom Waits kind of thing? I want to stay away from the Kevin Bacon vibe? Obviously not in those words, but were you worried about your music fans not following you into the writing?
Band, when I say my band's doing better, it just means that people are actually showing up to the gigs.
Yeah.
We weren't doing, it's like we got new tires on the old van kind of thing. So I never thought about it. My songs and my stories are the same. I'm a story songwriter. I'm really just a folk songwriter, and so the stories of my songs and the stories in my novels are the same. Yeah. And they're married, so it wasn't a big leap. Like, say, for the Bacon Brothers, they're known as actor, or Kevin Bacon, I guess, is known as an actor, where he's doing something totally different. We're Nick Cave, Nick Cave's amazing. He writes great novels and writes great soundtracks. Yeah. Writes great straight up songs. I could only aspire to that, but I never thought about it. I'm always flying. I'm like a really damaged 1982 Honda Civic. No one really pays attention to
dead in the door,
yeah. So I never thought about that stuff. I liked writing novels, and like I said, I finally got the courage to say, all right, let me see if I can get one of my books sold so it can be in a store or in the library.
When you talk about, is it interesting to have people that, maybe have come to you through your writing, which is, the second thing you've done for the public, right? You said you've been writing for a long time, but started releasing books a little bit later. Is it interesting to have people that come to you through the writing also go, oh, I didn't know you were in a band, even though the band was kind of the first thing that you were doing? Have you had that happen?
Yeah, more and more people don't know I'm in a band. I'm to be honest, man, I'm just really grateful when anyone reads any of my novels. I know, the modern world is not geared for people to read novels. So I really appreciate anytime anybody reads my novels. So, I mean, it's just lucky when anybody takes out the time to either listen to my music or read my novels. So I never mind any of that stuff.
You talked about today and in other times, your process about, I think you said something about how all your novels come from songs you've written. And it was one of the questions I was going to ask you. And I still kind of want to ask you it, but alter the question since you kind of answered it for the group already. I want you to talk a little bit about this process. When you were mentioning, bands you listen to, you're talking about Willie Nelson, you're talking about Springsteen, and you're mentioning, among others, you're mentioning artists who are kind of storytellers in their music as well. And were those early influences, did they influence you in this direction to try to use your music to tell stories? Yeah,
early on when I first started, I was obsessed with this band called X, and they write, they just had really catchy one-liners like, the phone's off the hook, but you're not. The world's a mess, it's in my kiss. Johnny Hit and Run Pauline. I would spend literally half my life as a kid trying to write one of those catchy lines, and I just couldn't. And what I found out later on was like my real interest. I had no talent in that to do that. But my other favorite thing with music was story, folk songs. Always was. The Pogues were a huge influence, and Springsteen. Because when I listened to Springsteen as a kid, I was, driving through the oil refineries in New Jersey with some girl, and having all these wild adventures. And being on the boardwalk, going to Asbury Park and all that, and when I was in Reno, Nevada, and he was a very, the thing I love about Springsteen is he's very romantic and he's very dark, and he's like an insecure romantic guy that walks with a lot of swagger at the same time. And so I just would disappear into his worlds, and I loved it. And the Pogues, I would disappear to Ireland and have these great adventures with these guys every night. Every time I put on the record, that I would disappear, and I understood the stories and the romance of it. I really liked it, and it really helped my life out a lot. So, yeah, of course I wanted to be a part of it. And then there was a songwriter, Paul Kelly, out of Australia. They call him like the Australian Bob Dylan. He's just one of the better songwriters that's ever been around, I think. And I was a huge fan of his, and he's a real literary guy. And by listening to his records, I found out about Raymond Carver, because he had written a song based on a Raymond Carver short story, and that's kind of how I started writing, is because I read Carver, and Carver's a Northwest writer and wrote working class stories, and I really identified with his stories. You mentioned this. I read an interview somewhere that Carver was a huge influence on your writing. You mentioned being really into Steinbeck when you were young too, and I wanted to ask you about that in terms of what is it about those two. You talked a little bit about what it was with Carver and writing working class stories that weren't about these kinds of fantastical events, and I find that interesting because when you refer to your writing as fantasy stories sometimes, but these stories about working class people in sometimes very destitute situations, and so in what way are they fantasy stories? And well, when I talk about that, in the pragmatic sense, like in the story, I can, like, in Lean on Pete, the kid steals a racehorse. And that's something that I would never have the courage to do. And he's a stronger person than me. He has more guts than I'll ever have. In that way, I've talked about fantasy. Maybe I'm not being articulate enough when I say fantasy. But a lot of the times, in the Motel Life, the two brothers, the Flanagan brothers, never turn on each other. They always take care of each other. That's a fantasy for me. So, in terms of needing things to happen to get by. I'll create a fantasy like that situation where two brothers never fight, which it just isn't realistic. But I did that because I needed to do that.
Are you close with your own brother?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a great guy. But in general, I mean, it's a relationship between people. People argue and get upset with each other and all that. But I didn't want that to happen in this world. In terms of working class, I always wanted to read stories about like my situation and the people around me. I loved, John D. MacDonald and the mysteries and crime books. Andre Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo was a big book when I was a little kid. But the guy that always killed me was Steinbeck as a kid, because he's dark in a way I like, and he's romantic in a way I like. Like I said earlier, if I could live anywhere or be in any situation, I would be in Cannery Row with Mac and the boys. That would be my dream life, to live with those guys. Or maybe get to stay at Doc's house. But he meant a lot to me. Grapes of Wrath means a whole lot to me. I liked that he had a sense of purpose with his writing. He gets criticized sometimes for being too sentimental, but I think that's wrong. I mean, I think he sides on hope and light instead of darkness. Carver just reminded me of myself and the way I felt growing up. The situations I saw growing up, his portrayal of kind of failed men really resonated with me as a kid. I understood it, but I won't read him anymore. He's too dark for me. I really admire the way he writes short stories, but he kind of haunts me a little bit. So I don't really read him anymore. And the guys I really strive to be like are like guys like William Kennedy, the great Albany, New York writer. He's kind of a guy that I think about on my daily when I think about my heroes daily. It's guys like William Kennedy.
Who else you like?
I mean, right now I'm another really important writer for me was Larry Brown, the Southern writer. He was based out of Oxford, Mississippi, and he's like Southern working class stories. He again had a little bit more light, although his stories are dark. He had more. I don't want to more air to him than Carver. He had more romance to him, I think, a little bit, which resonated with me. I love Flannery O'Connor. Yeah. I'm really into Richard Russo right now. Yeah. I can't put his books down right now. I like a guy named B. Traven, who wrote he wrote The Treasure of Sierra Madre. Okay. So yeah, I could go on and on.
Yeah, when you're talking about what's occurring to me, I hear you talking about. Willie Nelson. We're talking about John Steinbeck. I read somewhere that there's these characters or character types that don't leave you alone. I think you mentioned somewhere something about the drifter is a character that keeps coming back to you, and I wonder why that is. Because when I was reading that, I was thinking, this is a guy who's grown up in Reno. He's got all this creativity, he's got no outlet for it, and so he's dying to get out of this dead-end town and never look back. But when you talk about Reno, you don't talk about it that way. You don't talk about it as it's some shithole you were trying to get out of. You talk about it fondly. So
no, I love.
Yeah. So what is it about the drifter? What is it about that archetype that pulls you in? Because normally a drifter is someone trying to get away from something, or somebody can't go home.
I mean, first, I guess, I love Reno. I really did. I've tried to move back a few times. I left kicking and screaming. It was I felt that, and this might sound foolish or whatever, but I felt like I was born into the right town. Reno has a certain side to it that's pretty dark. It's a town built on alcoholism and gambling. Yeah. Maybe not so much anymore, but for a majority of when I grew up, it was a town made its living on the weakness of others. Yeah. And some guys can handle that just fine, and some guys pay the price. So you walk around downtown Reno and you see the guys that pay the price for it. I identify with those guys. I don't know why. I mean, my mom, like I said, my life wasn't that rough, but I really identified with those guys. And I've the edge that town had, I loved, and I loved the darker side of that town. I like the old man bars of that town. I always did. And so I left kind of kicking and screaming. But in terms of the Drifter, I guess I'm a fan of American culture, I guess, and a product of it. So, and America's built on westerns and drifters, and the movies and novels and songs are all so many about drifters. I just like the idea of escapism, like maybe somewhere. In the next town you'll be safe. Maybe in the next town you'll find a stable life. Maybe next time you'll find a stable family. Kind of thing.
You and I share some common background there. I spent some time in Grass Valley, California, and what I really appreciate about that whole area, and including into Reno, is it's got this very Western feel. There's history there. There's American history there. It's kind of a wild history, and so the town, but that area, kind of maintains its gold rush feel. Yeah. And it's the emotion, the emotionality of the place, the kind of bleeds through in the history. And I came to Portland through Reno because I played in a band in Reno that ended up moving up here. It was an industrial rock band called 16 Volt back in the early 90s, like 91. Wow. And they were in Reno and they moved to Portland, and I was in Las Vegas, which was where my father had retired, and I'd fly up to Reno, play in the band, and they came to Portland, and I came with them, right, to try to play in a band in Portland, for almost the same reason. Yeah, it's hard
to be in a band in Reno, Nevada in 1991.
Yeah, it really was. We didn't have a lot of options.
There was a band during that time called the Boston Wranglers. Mm-hmm. They were like a kind of a country rock band. Probably, like a more rockin' version of the Byrds, maybe, but like a Americana band. And they were one of the reasons I play the kind of music I play was that band, and I'm really influenced by that band. I loved them, and they were great guys. But besides that, Reno is a tough town to play music. It's a tough town when I grew up, it was a tough town to be a weirdo in, to like the arts and want to be in a band. And my mom was not a fan of music or me being in a band.
Really?
No.
So you started playing, let's get back to that. You started playing in, music in Reno when you're 15, 16 and just in and out of bands in the area for a while?
Yeah.
How did Richmond Fontaine come about?
I was a closet guitar player for years. I just wrote songs, and I tried to get bands going, and nothing really ever materialized in Reno. And so bands from Portland started. It was like, I guess, at the tail end of the grunge era. Mm-hmm. Bands, there's so many bands coming out of Portland and Seattle, but they were started to tour through Reno, and I started seeing them, and most of those guys were really cool, and they would tell me about Portland, and then, I worked for a trucking company, and they transferred me up to Portland.
Was it Freightliner by chance?
No, TNT.
Okay, I was just wondering if that was your connection to Chuck Palahniuk or not, because you're all Freightliner guys.
No, Jesus, no. I'm just a fan of his.
Yeah. You guys are doing an event in San Diego together coming up soon.
Yeah, in L.A., yeah. I'm really excited. Yeah, he's a really smart guy. He's been very nice to me, and I really admire him.
You worked together before?
No, Jesus, no. This was our first one, and he's got a great work ethic, and he's got a great mind. But no, I just loaded trucks, man. I think he was, higher up than that.
He was a shipping and receiving clerk. He told a funny story about when he was finishing Fight Club. He was still working there, and he didn't have money for a computer at home, and so he was writing the book in his office, and people kept interrupting him with orders and things, right, with work-related things, and it'd interrupt him in the middle of a scene, and he was trying to figure out a way, how can I sit in here and keep writing without having people interrupt me? And I mean, he told the story in a writing class of mine once, and you never know with Chuck if he's telling the truth, but I think he was. And he said he realized one day he came in, he had really bad gas, and he was farting up a storm, right, and nobody bothered him that whole day, and he got like 30-40 pages written.
Wow.
So then he started trying to do whatever he could to eat his money. He's eating Brussels sprouts, he's eating beans to try to feed. He said he farted his way through finishing that book. I mean, absolutely unbelievable story. Yeah, but he's a sharp dude.
Yeah, he's a very sharp guy.
You were telling me about the band, about your playing music in Reno. Nothing was really going.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I was like 26 or 27, and I worked. I lived an easy life, man. I just I worked 5 hours a day, stayed at the bars till 3 or 4 in the morning every night, and I was just kind of drowning there, and nothing I did musically was going very good, and so I took my big shot in life was I moved to Portland, Oregon, and turned out all right,
Yeah. And that's how Richmond Fontaine started. Yeah.
Yeah, I met a guy named Dave Harding, who moved here from Michigan, and we had similar ideas of music, and he was cool with playing my tunes. And
what year was this?
Oh man, maybe 94, cool. I would guess.
Where'd the name come from? Just for our listeners who don't know.
There was two friends of mine, Dave, the guy I just mentioned, and another guy drove this old Nissan station wagon down to Mexico, and they got down to Baja, and they got stuck. And then they met a guy named Rich Fontaine, who after 2 days, they were stuck in the desert with no one around for 2 days, and then a guy came up on a four-wheeler with a bunch of dogs who lived, I guess he'd been spying on him.
Wow.
And he was like a straight-up acid casualty, American expatriate kind of guy.
It's one of those stories can go either way, right? You know,
yeah,
so far it could be like a Rob Zombie movie set up from this point forward. But
and it was, they went and the guy got him out, and he took him back to his trailer.
Wow.
He was one of those guys that, you know, found a bale of cocaine and one of those weird guys that did bad things. And
it's like a Cormac McCarthy character or something.
It was kind of like that, but it was easy going because the guy was cool and cooked him some food and then sent him on their way. So
that's where it came from, huh?
Yeah, we thought it was funny. Yeah, I was obsessed with cars back then, you know, and I always wanted to name the band a car name, and the guys just really got tired of, because every car name had been taken.
Yeah, right.
And so we.
Edsell's not a very good name for a rock band.
Yeah, but Richmond Fontaine, no one has that.
You got to check with that guy, or do you just go with it? Yeah, how does that work?
Hopefully he won't show up someday.
Yeah, right.
But if he does, he sounds like a guy. He could stay with me for a couple days.
So the band, you guys 9 studio albums out, man. That's a pretty good body of work.
Yeah. I mean, we're a workhorse band, you know. I mean, I think again, I think, you know, instead of quitting, we just work on another record. You know, I think I always liked making records, and so our focus was like, hey, this record did a little bit better than our last record. Let's just keep going, and we all get along, and we're all friends, and so that makes it easier. And you know, we've never had that much success, and everybody's stuck around, so that helps.
So it's a stable lineup, pretty much, since today?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, well, and so I want to talk about the new song we're going to play in a second, but the impetus for the new record, and you know, maybe a question about where, you know, do you get an idea like you do for a novel, and or you know, I know the writing process is different when you have a group of people involved, but you know, where's the inspiration come from for the new record?
Well, the song I'm going to play is I started a new band.
Okay.
Richmond Fontaine, we took a break, and then while we took a break, our last tour, we toured with this woman named Amy Boone. She did a tour with Richmond Fontaine, and I really like her, and I really like her voice. She sings like country and soul tunes, so it just breaks my heart. It always has. And so at the end of the tour, she said, well, why don't you write me a record? And just kind of joking, I think. And I'd always wanted to be in a band where I wasn't singing. And I was desperate to do that, and I didn't know how to do it really. And so this was my shot. And so because I love her voice so much, so I went home and put a new band around her, and she sings the songs. And so this first song is called Colfax Avenue. And I wrote this song while working on the novel The Free. This is a song about a woman who's going to look for her brother on Colfax Avenue in Denver, Colorado. He's came back from Iraq, and he's been having a really hard time, and he hits the bars too hard. He's crumbling, and she's driving around looking for him. And I was writing this song while I was working on Leroy Kervin's character in The Free, the brain damaged vet. So this is Colfax Avenue.
Let's hear it.
I got woken up late last night by a friend of his. Said he left the lion's lair with a bloody head, and he could hardly walk and disappear. My husband's asleep, my kids are in bed. I leave a note and start driving up and down liquor stores and the bars they still let him into. He wasn't like this before he left. Now he comes back and his mind's a wreck. And the army, what do they do? My husband's worn out, my kids are scared, but he's my little brother and he's out there somewhere. Colfax Avenue, up and down Colfax Avenue. Nights can be so long, and it's so cold outside. He's just a kid who's seen too much. He's just a kid up and down Colfax Avenue. Up and down Colfax Avenue.
All right, man, we're back. That's a great track. Tell me more about what's going on with this record. Are you guys planning on doing some touring around this, or?
Yeah, it comes
She has a
out.
beautiful voice.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, it's kind of late night. We tried to make a late night kind of country soul record. We're touring.
Yeah, Emmylou Harris kind of vibe to it a little
Yeah,
bit.
like we were hoping for. There's a that kind of, or like a
Wrecking
kind of
Ball.
more
You heard that
of a-
record? That
yeah,
thing she did with Daniel Lanois, I believe. It's
like a really
unbelievable.
laid back kind of like a Quaalude-driven Dusty Springfield.
Yeah,
maybe
for
a
sure,
little
man.
bit. We're touring, and the record comes out in a couple weeks, and then we're touring in Europe, in England, Ireland, mostly in June, and then we'll do some stuff in the U.S. too. I'm not sure right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
So some other bands. I heard you mention the Drive-By Truckers. We've talked about some of your literary influences. What about modern music that you're into? Any bands you totally dig besides the Truckers?
Yeah, I mean, I do really love the Drive-By Truckers. I mean, if I could be in any band, I would probably have been in the Drive-By Truckers.
Yeah.
I just have to be a better songwriter, a better guitar player, and have a better voice. But once I get those three things,
You'll be all right.
we were talking on break about Elliott Smith.
Mm-hmm.
I really admire his songwriting. I think he was a genius songwriter. Really cool guitar player as well.
Mm-hmm.
I really like his stuff. Like I said, my big guys growing up were Tom Waits, Springsteen, and Willie Nelson. I mean, those three guys I always go back to. I was a big fan of like that whole '80s punk rock scene in LA. It was kind of roots rock too, the Blasters, Los Lobos, X. Dwight Yoakam came out of
Exene
that.
Cervenka, you talk about another person with multiple talents, right?
She's really talented.
I have a lot of people in that band, and
She
John
wrote,
too.
and she's the one, I think, I could be wrong, but I think she wrote a lot of the really cool one-liners.
Yeah.
And then, those kind of bands really changed my life. I mean,
I could see John and yourself collaborating on a musical project together.
I've been a huge fan, of his for years. I just admire him. He's another guy that just consistently writes really cool records, and so I'm a big fan.
Just a few more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. I want to talk to you about the new book and a little bit about the impetus for it. But when I was doing the research for our interview, I came, somebody, I think Lydia Yuknovich had posted something on her Facebook page about the event, and somebody from, I think it might have even been a student named Tori from this college, wrote a wonderful comment about the event. She said, "He writes books that make me feel like I matter." And
that's nice.
Yeah, I wanted to share that with you, but I also wanted to maybe get some feedback from you on that. When you're talking about, when your background with Carver, or what you were saying to some of the students today, that you don't need to write fantastical kinds of stories. They don't need to be super tragic. They don't need to be about these outlandish events. They can be, but they just need to be honest and raw in your stories with your blood. And I think, it sounds like you've written from that place in your life, and I think that resonates with people. When someone, I can't think of a better compliment when someone says his books make me feel like my life matters and my stories matter.
That's really nice.
So the new novel, The Free, can you talk a little bit about where this the impetus for it, where it came from?
I wrote The Free really is a distress call to the patron saint of nurses, in hopes that he would look after the characters. There's a National Guard electrician who gets a brain injury in Iraq and has been in a group home for nearly 8 years, named Leroy Curvin. So I wrote the book for him. And then there's a working class guy named Freddie McCall that, lost his family due to his wife and him split up. They had a kid born with severe disabilities, and they went broke trying to pay for the medical bills for the kid, and the couple started fighting like couples do when they're under a lot of pressure. And she met somebody else, and so now we find this guy. He's working 2 jobs trying to pay off these bills, trying to save his house. So he's under a lot of pressure himself. And then the third character is Pauline Hawkins, who's a post-operation nurse who's 35, and she's kind of drowning in her personal problems and her patients' problems. So when we find her, she's kind of isolated herself and kind of lost her humanity, and then she meets a kid who's on her floor, who's a runaway kid, and she decides to try to help this kid and kind of reawakens her humanity, I guess. And so it's really it's a novel about healthcare, and it's kind of a commentary a little bit, I guess, on my take on where America's at right now.
I heard you mention something about Obamacare. I think the quote I read is, "It's like your aunt had her 70th birthday party and your brother shows up 2 hours late with a prostitute as a date, and he's got a black eye and he smells. That's Obamacare. It's late and it's got baggage and issues, but it's there."
Yeah. People can complain about it and there are a lot of problems. I mean, it's been shot many times and it's changed, but it is a start. And look, a lot of people are really mad about it, but the people that have gotten health insurance for the first time in their lives, or a middle-aged man who got kicked out of his health group, health plan, and now can get health care again, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think it's an under-examined subject in the novel form too, and so people that all kind of congregate together around this one issue, their access or lack of access to health care through one thing or another, through job, through lack of finances, all of the above. This is the new America, and I think the book really, at least through my reading of it, it shows the desperation that people can feel at the tail end of that. To be facing these choices of bankruptcy for life or bad health for life. I mean, with no options, man. I mean, I was one of the only guys, up until Obamacare, I was one of the only friends that didn't have like a steady job, but worked for himself, musician, that had health insurance. None of the guys I knew had health insurance, and they never went to the doctor. And they would go to the doctor when they were dying, when they had to go to the emergency, and then the emergency room was really expensive. I mean, my girlfriend's back went out, and she has health insurance. We went to the ER, and it was waited for 4 hours. The guy gave her medication, saw her felt her back for the whole thing. Took 5 minutes once we saw the doctor, and it was over $1,000 Wow.
with insurance. So I mean, something's wrong, obviously, and it's something wrong when most of the friends I know don't have health insurance, and they're all guys that are college educated or have jobs or what have you, but they just can't get it, or it's too expensive.
Did you feel a pressure to get this book right because of the subject matter, because that was so important, or because of the 3 different stories? Because you talked about writing it in 6 months, but taking 3 years to revise it.
Yeah, I mean I was really worried about it. I mean, it's hard. I'm not a huge fan of multiple stories going on in a novel because it makes me think about the writer, and the last thing I ever want to think about is somebody writing it. I just want to disappear. And it's really tricky when people mess around like that. You have to be good to do it. Like I'm reading Richard Russo right now, Mohawk, and he's brilliant at it. Yeah. And I've never once thought about him writing it in a turtleneck in some office somewhere. Which is a huge compliment for me. And the other thing was its heavy subject. It has comments on religion and on war and the healthcare system in the USA. All subjects that are very heated and people have a lot of strong opinions about, obviously. So yeah, it worried me a lot. It was the hardest thing I ever attempted, and about did my head in.
The book doing well? People enjoying it?
Yeah, it seems like it's done well. It seems like it's doing what it's supposed to do. They seem happy, and it did good in so far in the UK. It's done good, which is great.
Awesome. Well, Willy Vlautin, thank you for coming in, man. We've really appreciated that.
Hey, thanks for taking out the time. I appreciate you taking out the time.
Absolutely. This wraps up our time with Willy Vlautin, and we will see you on down the road.
I'm just fucked, Arlene. I don't have any guts. Her father was a logger, and he was always out of work. Her mother hardly said a nice word ever. Then the girl got pregnant by a kid she knew, and she waited a long time before she told him. But they got married anyway, even though she didn't want to. They lived in a trailer home that was way out and alone. Then the kid, who was also a logger, got his leg crushed by a fallen tree. He hardly ever worked after that. And the girl, she miscarried in the 8th month. And that's really late and hard. And after that, the kid just quit talking to her. She got a job in an auto parts store. All the guys there kept hitting on her and bothering her, because they all knew her husband and they didn't like him. This is up near Klatskanai. She's in the middle of nowhere. After work, she'd take long walks by herself on the logging roads. And each night she'd go home and make dinner with a kid, and then she'd watch TV with him. And no one knew how it was for the girl. And finally one day, the girl disappeared. For a while it was in the papers and on the radio. No one ever saw her again. No one ever knew what happened. Not even the police, who were sure it was the kid. Could never pin it on him. That's all I got so far, Arlene.
Hello, my name is Lydia Yuknovich, and you're listening to On the Block Radio.
What are you doing? He asked her. You were having a nightmare, and I didn't know what else to do. In the movies, when someone has a fever, They always put a cold washcloth on them. Does it make you feel better? Yes, he whispered. Are you okay now? I don't think so. I swing from drowning into you to drowning in these terrible images. I want to die inside you, but I'm scared I'll die inside of one of those ships. And I don't think my mind knows what to do, and I can't control it anymore. You're just having bad dreams, she said. They're just dreams. So shape up, all right? No more nightmares for you. Deal? Okay, he said. But he knew then, in his heart, that they would never go away. I've never had a girl wash my face while I was sleeping, he whispered. Well, now you have, and I'll do it for you every day, she said and laughed. Well, maybe not every day, but a lot of days. You'll be lucky if you keep trying. I swear you will. She turned on the stereo, and Amalia Rodriguez began playing. Oh, I love her voice, he said. I know. It makes me think of my uncle. Well, I know that too. Can we just stay here and listen to her and rest? We'll rest for a while, she said. But we have to keep going. Leroy Curvin opened his eyes to see a woman in a blue and white starred bikini holding a pneumatic drill. He could see her blonde hair and high heels and thin long legs. For the first time in 7 years, he could see her without blurred vision. He could see her clearly from the glow of a small-colored nightlight. He lay in a twin bed and looked at the girl. He could read the company name below her on the calendar, Jackson's Tool Supply. He remembered that his cousin worked there. Suddenly he could think things through. He could put things together where in the past years he'd been unable to. It was like his mind had suddenly walked out of a never-ending snowstorm. Tears dripped down the side of his face in relief. Was he finally free? Was he really himself again?
You've been listening to On the Block. Of all of the voices in your head, thanks for making ours one of them.
I'm trying to think if I've had any excitingly bad jobs. No, I just worked for trucking companies. I worked for a chemical company. I just did manual labor warehouse jobs for years. I mean, I did have a job working for a veterinarian, and one of my jobs was picking up dead cats and dogs all over Reno every Sunday. I'd go to each veterinary hospital, and they had a El Camino, those kind of 70s El Camino, and that was the car you'd put them in, and they're all wrapped in like plastic garbage bags, and they're frozen, and it's really fucking hot in Reno in the summer, and they would just slide back and forth. I thought that was pretty, in a fucked up sort of way, it's pretty funny and heartbreaking. And then you got to take them to the Humane Society, and they burn them all. They put them in big 55-gallon drums, all these cute little cats and dogs. So that was kind of a weird job, I guess. I worked for like a water filter guy for a while, like a pyramid scheme guy. He didn't believe in computers, so he wanted me to write his letters for him on a typewriter. And back then I was a horrible typist. And then he'd yell at me if there was any mistakes, and I'd be like, Jesus, dude, I could do it on a computer in like 5 minutes, man, and we could just make a form letter. And he's like, no, I don't like computers. So I'd sit in this little room with him while he tried to sell these water filtration systems to old ladies and shit like that. So that's another one. I guess I do have had a few of them. I try to block out every bad thing like that. So eventually I got fired for being a slow typist. Fucking guy.
You've been listening to On the Block Radio with Andrew Gurovich. The show is produced in Portland, Oregon by Michael DiNapoli at MD Productions. Theme music by Moving the Mountain. Closing music by Jonathan Oak. Look us up on the web at ontheblockradio.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Don't forget to tune in next week for a brand new episode. Previous episodes can be found on our website. Thanks for listening.
Well, you're beautiful kitty kitties. Oh, look at you out there. Beauty like a bolt of light in a darkened hallway. New minds looking at this world, at our lives, with the perspective of apocalypse children. Standing dusty in the barren highways, standing broken before the fathers who were meant to make us whole, but who only lied to us about what it meant to be a man, about what it meant to be a woman, about what it meant to be a child of this doomed age.